Once upon a time, there was a little princess that grew up into a beautiful princess. She found that she could do whatever she wanted because she was the most special person in the world and only filled with goodness and kindness. She could climb to the top of the mountains with her brothers, and whatever she dreamed of, she could have. She grew up in a fairy tale world filled with everyone who told her she was so special, and she was the best at everything she did. Nothing the little princess could do was ever wrong, and she was successful in everything she tried. But then she grew up, and she went out into the real world. There she found out that she was just like every other princess, and for the first time, she had to work really hard just to keep up with the other princesses, the farmers, and even the townfolk. After many failures, she learned that success is not always guaranteed, but earned. She learned that you can do it, but you have to work for it. And you have to learn from those failures. That you must ask for help, but also help others.
But, Mom, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not a princess. I'm a unicorn.
Better fix.
Is my hair right? Oh, yeah. It's important, right? Hi, I'm Susan. Oh, this is really loud. And we're really excited to be here, as part of this 10th anniversary this year. Is everybody else really excited to be here? Yeah? Excellent. Now, despite what you guys have heard, I know I'm not actually a unicorn. Now, there are several unicorns out here. I can see a few of you out here.
Yeah.
But I'm not one of them. My current title is a director of SAP systems, and what that actually means is that I support some really smart people who make me look really good. That's my job. And yes, this is my mother. I mean, how cool is this? How many people get to stand up here on a stage with their mother and do a speech like this, right? Yeah. And, although Jose gave me a great compliment, she doesn't look like she has a 40-year-old daughter, does she? Or a 13-year-old granddaughter.
I'm very fortunate. And hi, I'm Janet. Actually, I was 12 when I had her.
What? Really?
No, not really. But I like to say that because it makes people think. They do math in their heads. So, yes, I'm a co-author with Lisa of a couple of small books, Agile Testing, More Agile Testing. But mostly these days I work with teams who want to learn more. Last year I gave a closing keynote, and my story is out there for the world if you want to go watch it if you weren't there. And it tells me a little bit about how I got to be here. Today, I'll share a few more of those experiences, and we hope you enjoy.
So we've all read those fairy tales to our children, or we've been read them. And, I think we all would love to live that fairy tale, right? Like, it's so easy, right? And you get to decide you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a pilot. And I've never actually heard of a 4-year-old wanting to be in IT, though. I don't know. Anybody? No? Yeah. And you get to have your career and your family, and it's so easy. Now, to the outside world, my life actually probably resembles a fairy tale pretty closely. I have an amazing career at a great company. I have a really great husband, a son, a daughter, and a support system filled with lots of family and friends. But make no mistake, it was a lot of work to get here where I was. It wasn't that fairy tale that my mother told me when I was young.
Go figure.
And, I had a lot of advantages that let my story unfold the way that it had, starting with some strong female and male role models in my life. I had a working mother and a father who took on lots of stereotypical female jobs like cooking and cleaning when he was home.
Yes, he's actually much better at that than I am. But in spite of starting with a fairy tale, we want you to take away some very specific ideas today. We will share our experiences, and we hope you can take some of that out away from you. We will have, and we know our experiences aren't the same for everybody, so we'll make some generalizations, and we know they may not be true for you. We'll talk a little bit about some of our commonalities, some differences in age and how that's affected us. We'll also talk a little bit about diversity, how that's affected us, and some of the barriers that we've seen in our jobs. We hope that our journey will help you, that you'll be able to take some ideas, apply them maybe to your own relationships in your workplace, maybe in your home life. We hope that as you think about something and you go, ooh, maybe I could have done that differently, or that happened to me, jot it down. Come see us after, because we have a Q&A session in the next time slot. Bring those stories. I'd love to talk to you about them. So let's start with a story. When Susan was in grade 12, we uprooted her and we moved her to a new city. So she enrolled in all her classes, one of them being a programming class. She walked into the new school. She went to her programming class. She walked in. The teacher welcomed her and said, "Susan, we're so happy to have you in our programming class." The only girl. So she walked in, started to sit down, and then the teacher said, "But Susan, we're doing Turbo Pascal. So if you don't know anything about Turbo Pascal, if you don't know anything about this or that or this, you may as well just walk out." The next day, well, let me back up a second. She come home that night in a blind panic because although she said no problem to the teacher, she had never even heard of Turbo Pascal.
Nope.
She had no idea what he was talking about. And I said, "No worries. I'll help. I can tutor you. I know Pascal." And so through the year, we worked on it. The second day in that class, the teacher gave a pop quiz. She failed really badly. By the end of the year, she worked really hard, but by the end of the year, she had the top marks in that class. I was very proud. But during one of the parent-teacher interviews I had with this teacher, he said to me, "I think Susan must have just had a really bad day because that quiz obviously didn't show what she knew." And I sat there and I looked at him and I went, held my breath, because Susan made me promise that I wouldn't tell him the truth. So she handled it.
Now, how do you think the outcome of that story would have been if I didn't have my mother in my life or a role model to help tutor me through that class? First of all, I probably never would have even joined a programming class because I wouldn't have known what it was. And certainly when I walked in that door that day and saw I was the only female, I would have walked out. And if I didn't walk out right away, when the professor told me what he said, I definitely would have walked out there. So I can't tell you the importance of having people in your life to show you what's possible. You can't be what you can't see. as Marian Wright Edelman says.
Now, when I started university, so I was just a little bit younger than Susan when I went to university. I had no role model. I had no idea what was even possible. I was really full of self-doubt, but I found friends who helped me along the way, and I was a little bit lucky in the friends I chose who helped me. Now, every one of you, us, we are role models. Maybe it's to the person sitting next to you in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's to the next generation. We are role models in so many ways. So remember that, because I think it's a really important thing.
Now, along with strong female role models, I had another advantage in my life. My father taught me how not to take things personally, how to let things roll off my back and not internalize them. Now, this was good and bad. It was good because it allowed me to get through many situations in which other people might have been bothered by them. It was bad, though, because things didn't bother me. I did nothing to help the next person that came along. And as a leader, I realized I need to do better. Being silent doesn't help anyone. Now, I was on a project with 15 men one time. I was the only female. And I'd worked with them for about 8 months, a great group of men, when a new junior analyst started with the team. About a month into the project, she came into my office and she shut the door. And she confided in me that she was struggling with some of the comments and the conversations that were being made by these men when she was around. And having worked with these men for a long time, I knew exactly what she was talking about. But my advice at the time to her was, deal with it. These are the norms of the team. It's a moment I will regret forever. And it's a pivotal moment, a learning moment for me, that I can't remain silent when I see something like that. If somebody is uncomfortable, just because it doesn't make me uncomfortable, doesn't mean it's the same experience for everyone else. So it's important for me that the culture around me is inclusive for everyone. And this is a lesson that I teach many young men and women that I mentor as they start off in their career. Now it's not working. Oh, there we go.
There it is. In her book, Delusions of Gender, Cordelia Fine talks about references a study that was done in France. There were 2 groups of high school students. One group was asked a question to think about how they viewed stereotypes in maths and sciences. The control group was not asked that question. A little later, they were asked to rate their own personal score on a test, a national standardized test that they had done 2 years earlier. The differences between the 2 groups was quite outstanding, I think. The group that was asked to say, do you think there's a difference between men and women in how they do in arts and science or arts and math, was dramatically different, I think. The boys, they actually, well, both groups, changed and altered their memories. They thought, the boys thought that they did, on average, 3% higher in math than they did in the arts. They actually decreased their art by 3%. The girls did exactly the opposite. They increased their art score and decreased their math score by 3%. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot until you go to think about 2 young people, a boy and a girl. They're thinking about going to university. The boy thinks, yeah, you know what? I got an A in math. I think I'll go into this. The girl says to herself, yeah, I didn't do so well in math. I only got a B. Now, you have to remember they got exactly the same score, but in their minds, they altered it. How different will their paths be because of what they think? No wonder we have a hard time getting women into STEM careers.
So even after I decided to make computer science my major in university, I didn't realize how often I would have to keep telling myself I could succeed at this. After all, I'd seen my mother successfully do it right before me. Now, I was one of very few women in my graduating class, and of those few women, I was even fewer who had this hair color. Now, how many blonde jokes do you think I've heard in my lifetime? Like a lot, right? And although they're often very funny, they don't paint me in a good light, and nor do they make me feel good about my potential. Now, I also had to, as a young married woman, deal with the problem of having babies. In Canada, we're lucky enough to have a year maternity or paternity leave. And although I've seen a few men take the year off as paternity leave, it's still really rare. So I was newly married, and I was prepping for an interview. And I can remember my friend's father giving me the advice to take off my wedding ring in the interview. And he said, if you do wear it and they notice it, make sure you let them know that you're not planning on having babies anytime soon. Because he thought that that might affect me getting the job. So that was the first time in my life that I thought of my marital status, my gender, my age as a hindrance to my career. So I actually decided to be true to myself, and I went in there wearing my wedding ring. I didn't get the job, and I don't know if it affected getting the job or not, but I do know that it won't let that affect who I hire on my teams from now on.
The funny thing is that I hired a young man one time. 6 months after he started, he took the paternity leave. It never even occurred to me to ask at the job interview. Didn't even occur.
Probably illegal, too.
Yeah. My job hunting was a little bit different. I faced a different issue. When I got out of university and I went looking at all the job postings, I was in that catch-22. They all wanted at least 2 years' experience. I had 0 because my summers were spent taking care of my children. No summer job. So my very first interview, I went in, picture this, me, about 40, and across from 3 young men. I swear they were 14. I'm sure they weren't, but they felt like that. Anyhow, it didn't go well. I walked out of there and went, I don't want to work there anyhow. But I was lucky that in my next interview, the people who were interviewing were a little bit older, and the hiring manager was a woman my age. She looked at my resume. She saw my school, which, wasn't incredibly high, but she saw the rest of my life experiences and recognized what they could add to the job.
So there's a much publicized internal Hewlett-Packard report that you guys have probably all heard about at some point, where it states that men apply for jobs if they have 60% of the requirements on that job posting. And women will only apply for that job if they meet 100% of the requirements on that job posting. And I've had firsthand experience with this. I was hiring a junior analyst on my team, and I got the list of applicants back from Human Resources. And of those applicants, 2 of the 20 were female. That's 10%. Now, I wasn't looking to hire a female at the time, but I did have an 80% male team. So I went back and I looked at the wording in my job posting. And I took out all the words that indicated that something must be mandatory for them to apply. So, for example, if it said skill XYZ is required, I might have changed that to skill XYZ is nice to have. Or you must have skill XYZ, I would change to skill XYZ is preferred. The next time that the list of applicants came back, 45% were women. Same job posting, different language. So when you're creating job postings or you're reading them, just make sure you look at the language that captures the attention of all of the applicants. Now, take a second and read that. So this was actually a sign that was up in the kitchen of a company that I worked at. And I worked at this company with my husband, Nathan. So I didn't keep this picture of this sign because of the witty markup that somebody made. I kept it as a sign of all the small but visible signs of stereotypes that still occur in the workplace today. So why does your wife or your mother have to be the one to clean the kitchen? My children can attest that my husband, who's actually back there somewhere, right there, he is far more likely to clean our kitchen than I am. And I am sure there's many other households out there like that. Actually, my 11-year-old son, he saw this sign and he said, "That doesn't make any sense, Mom." He said, "It should actually say, please clean up after yourself. Your kids don't work here." So, you know, we all pitch in my family. But watch your language when you're at work and watch for little signs like this. You know, don't bolster the stereotypes, work to tear them down instead.
Now, when I went into the office, I still am, almost the oldest person in any team I'm with. So when I go in, and I'm the age of their mothers very often.
You don't look it. You don't
thank
look
you.
it.
Yeah. I had to work really hard not to do that thing. I had to work hard not to be the mom. So in the kitchen, I would not empty the dishwasher. I would wash my own dishes, take them back into my office, just so that it wasn't, unless it was part of taking turns and everybody took turns, right? There was even one place I worked where the coffee pot was so disgusting, I wouldn't even have a cup of coffee out of it. I didn't want to clean it, so I went and bought my own coffee pot and kept it in my office. I worked really hard at it. Another example was that very first job. We had quite a nice equal split, actually, of programmers, male and female. So I shared a cubicle with one of the men. He was young, about 30, a couple of small children. And most of the time, he treated me as an equal, a junior equal, because I was new to the job. But one day, he come in, and he had a stack of papers, not a big stack, a little stack, and he puts them on my desk, and he says, "Photocopy these." I looked at him. Nothing to do with the project I was working on. So I looked at him, I picked them up, I went and I photocopied them. But I brought them back, I held them out to him, I waited till he made eye contact with me. I said, "Here's your photocopies. Please think twice about telling me to do it again. I am not your secretary." It took a lot of guts to do that, by the way, an extreme amount of courage.
No, nobody would be doing that to you now, Mom.
No.
So small biases can show many ways in the workforce. Younger employees may think that older employees are incapable of keeping up with trends or of changing. And older employees might possibly mistakenly think that younger employees are lazy just because they don't come in at 8 and leave at 5. So try not to perpetuate any of those stereotypes and do something about it. Being silent, by the way, is not the same thing as being part of the solution. Speak up. Say something. Now, I'm going to explain some of the other challenges that I've faced in my life. Now, I'm going to get maybe a few oohs on this one, but it's a discussion that I've had with many men and women over my lifetime. And I'm talking about all of the extra work that a female typically does to run the household on top of her job. And the perfect way to explain this is when I travel for work. So we're a busy family. We have 2 kids in very competitive sports, and our evenings are running around driving them everywhere. We're chauffeurs all night long. And before I can travel, I have had to arrange for carpool to figure out which kid goes where and when. I've had to make sure the kids know where they're going, and I've written a list for my husband and telling him where he has to be and which kids he has to pick up from where. I've made dentist appointments, I've made special notes of special lunches at school and exams that are coming up. And our fridge is literally filled with lists of everything that I've had to say before I can leave. Now, when my husband leaves for work, he packs his suitcase, calls a taxi, and he leaves. Now, I want to make sure, he's sitting right there, so I want to make sure you know that he's an amazing husband and father, and he splits the household duties 50-50, probably more like 60-40. He does a lot. He cooks, he cleans, he helps drive the kids around. That's not what I'm saying. He's really great. But what I am saying is that people like me, I've always felt that I have to prove that I can do it all. That I can do it all. I can have the career and I can have the family, I can do it all. Now I see that tide shifting. I see more and more women showing that they can be vulnerable, that they can ask for help. I saw my mother start her career in a time where women, if they wanted a career, had to prove to their husbands that they could do it all, that the household wouldn't suffer when they went back to work. That's not the case any longer. So, make sure you're asking for help. They might not do it exactly how you want it done, but they can help. And be vulnerable. It's a sign of strength if you can ask for help. And now you're saying that men are leaving meetings early to go take their kids to their sports. And that's a sign of strength too, not something they have to hide from their buddies, like maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And workplaces. They are really helping us out with that work-life balance as well. So they offer flexible working hours and the ability to work from home. More men are taking paternity leave, and as I mentioned, they're leaving work early to go help with the kids. Workplaces are making it easier for us to lead a balanced life and make choices that allow us to be productive and present. Now, Mom, she's had some different challenges in her career.
Yeah, I'm one of these people that I've never let age stop me. I just don't. I've gotten a few role models over the years. People like Linda Rising, who's 75 years old and still up researching, talking, sharing her ideas. Or Mary Poppendick, who's traveled the world with her husband and wrote books. So we've had lots of role models. And I think that's really important. Now, age can be a double-edged sword. I often get instant respect. People open the door for me. They let me go first. So that's kind of a fun thing. I like that. I'll never say no. But also, I sometimes get the opposite effect. You're older. You must have used punch cards. Do you even know what I'm talking about when I say this? So sometimes I wonder when people are actually going to stop hiring me because of my age. Now, there was a video a while ago which I found very interesting, and I should change the slide because I didn't.
Yeah, that's not you.
That's not me, no. And it's not, there we go, that's more me. And this video paired older people, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, with younger people, 20 or 30. Now, the young people were asked, what age do you consider old? The answer surprised me. It was anywhere from 45, so you're almost old, to 80. It was a real variety depending on the person and what they were used to, I guess. So they did that, and then they asked the people, so can you translate what you mean by old? So one of the people said, well, they had named an age, 10 years younger than me, and they said, I think a person 10 years younger than me would walk across the street like this. What? A person my age would text like this.
Oh, wait a sec. I've seen you do that, though.
It's only when my progressives aren't right. Yeah, right? But the next part of the video was they paired the people together, a young person and an old person, and asked them to teach something that they were good at to the other person. What happened out of this was that the young people really understood that age is relative, that people who are 60 or 70 can still learn, and that they have things to offer. Right? My favorite scene, by the way, was this 75-year-old lady who was teaching this young guy a really difficult yoga pose. It was really funny. Yeah. Anyhow, I recognize that some old folks, I'll put old in brackets, are stuck in their ways. It happens. They don't want to change. But I also have seen lots of young people who won't listen to advice because they think, you're old, you don't know anything. Kind of like when you offer advice to your daughter when she's having a baby and she goes, but Mom, babies are different now. Right?
Yeah. No?
How we think about people, how we treat people is really important. So I don't know everything. I often ask my grandchildren to teach me things, the latest being Instagram. I had to say, what? Because my granddaughter posts pictures on it. How technology affects how we use it, but how we view technology also affects how we view it. Change, there we go. My first computer was in 1985. It was an Apple. I was able to play some rudimentary games, some fun little games. I did a few WordPerfect documents, and that's about all I could do. By the time I went to university in 1987, I had dial-up modem. It was a slow green screen, very much like this. But it allowed me to work and do my homework from home in the evenings. Really slow, but it allowed me to do that. I was happy. Susan went a few years later. She still had dial-up. It was faster, but she had the ability to go spend most of her time at the university in the lab.
Yeah, and I can remember spending hours and hours on a C program watching it compile. And then it would not compile and it would break, and I would print it out on the dot matrix printer, and I'd take my highlighter and I'd go scouring for that missing semicolon or bracket. Does anybody else remember doing that? But now your IDE indicates immediately when you have incorrect syntax, right? And those 4, 5, 6 hours that we used to spend waiting for things to compile, now you can just use that to code and code some really cool stuff with that time instead.
How people use technology is age dependent or dependent on their needs. kids all have smartphones now. I'm sure just about everybody here, if not everybody, uses theirs. I use mine for a phone. I use it to text. I play games on it. I use it so I don't get lost. But mostly, it's a phone. That's what I use it for. I still prefer to use a camera to take pictures. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Though I've seen a few cameras around, so this is good.
No.
Susan doesn't even own one. But I can't imagine all the things that you can do on a cell phone because I don't use it that way. To me, it's a phone.
Yeah, and I'm with whoever said that there. I can't believe she still carries a camera around. I mean, it's a phone and a camera. So I use my phone for everything. It's my navigator, my communication device, my calendar. I pay my coach's kids with it. I buy movie tickets with it. It's everything. I lose it, I'm in a lot of trouble. Although it's backed up to the cloud, so I guess just buy a new phone and I still have it. But I'm still constrained by my own experiences. So I was at my daughter's gymnastics competition one time, and the kids were trying to practice their routine. And in the area where they were told they could practice, there was no access to electricity and no speaker. So the coaches and I were trying to figure out how to bring a speaker to this area with no electricity, and we didn't have a big Wi-Fi speaker. And actually, we couldn't figure out how to do it. So we thought, okay, you're going to have to practice without music. And a little girl came to us, and she goes, I have a solution. We promptly ignored her because if we couldn't figure it out, she couldn't figure it out.
She was a little girl.
And then all of a sudden, 3 minutes later, we look over, and the music is pumping out, and it's quite loud. What had happened is that little girl had got her phone out, and she had all the 16 little phones of everybody else in that group. They had it out too. They downloaded an app. And when one person played the music on their app, it played at the same time on all the other little phones.
It was pretty cool.
16 little phones acting as 16 little speakers. 16 little speakers is as effective as one large speaker. That little girl taught us that she saw the world differently. She'd used a phone since birth. It wasn't a phone, right? Something that we never would have thought of.
For sure, me never. Our views on how we use technology, how we leverage technology, is based on our constraints that a lot of times are up here in our head, and how we currently use it. Now, to me, Susan's story is a very compelling reason why we need diversity on our teams. How else are we going to get creative new solutions to problems if we keep only being constrained by our own experiences? Now, as a new manager, this is a few years ago, it was my first management job. I walked in, I'm all excited, but I was expected to change my style to match those on the management team. Now, the management team was both men and women, but they all had very strong, very assertive styles. The loudest, the most confident, they usually won, right? So I had a softer style. But if I wanted a seat at that table, I had to change my style. One example that comes to mind is my status reports. So every time I'd give a status report, my boss, if I talked about a problem, he would try to fix it. He'd say, did you try this? How about this? He didn't do that to anybody else. So I thought about it, and I realized maybe it was the way I was delivering it. So I became strong and confident and assertive and gave my status report the way everybody else did. The trouble was that inside, I didn't feel very good about myself. I felt dishonest. I felt that I was withholding information. It wasn't a good feeling.
So I've recently started a new job, and the management team I'm on is incredibly diverse. And on the first interview that I went to, I was in the VP's office, the vice president's office, and I noticed a chart on the wall in his office. And it was a chart of a whole bunch of personality types of his team. And I noticed that it was very diverse. And so we talked about that, and I realized that his values were aligned with mine, that a diverse team made for a stronger team. Now, there's communication style differences, but as long as we're aware of that, all those different perspectives add so much value to our conversation.
How we see people communicate is different. So if you see somebody who's struggling, maybe they're being talked over because they're softer, stand up. Help them. Don't just watch. Last week I was at a conference and I listened to a autistic developer give a talk. It was an excellent talk. But what I found so good about it was that he told us how to help him. If he was in these circumstances, this is how you could help. So it really made me think that what we need to do is start becoming allies. Could you be my friend and help me when I struggle, right? So we can help each other. Don't necessarily wait for people to ask for help because they might be shy. Perhaps watch and offer, or just stand up and pay attention.
So inclusion means to be included in a group. And it's a term that's talked about openly and honestly today a lot. You've heard it quite a bit. In one night, I was asked to go out with a group of my peers for a night out for drinks. Sounds good? I'd love to go out. I ended up being the only female who went out. The rest of my female peers decided to opt out. Now, we had a really great night. It was fun and full of great conversation. And the next morning, I went to work, and I was excited to be there. And a woman pulled me aside. And she's my peer, and she pulled me aside, and she said, "I can't believe you went out last night." She said, "You need to be careful. You don't want to be thought of as one of those girls." I don't even know what that meant. Like, what does that mean, those girls? So my first reaction was to apologize. I did. But then I felt really uncomfortable. I wasn't allowed to go out with the group of men because then I wouldn't be part of the group of women who stayed back. And I couldn't stay back with the group of women because then I wouldn't be part of the group of men who went out. I was excluded no matter what I did. So one of my mentors said, "Well, why don't you look at it from a different perspective? Why don't those women want to go out?" So I went and asked. And the first woman I asked, she said, "Well, it's boring, quite frankly. The men talk about sports all night." So I took her with the next time we went out, and I said to the men, "You can talk about sports, but it can't dominate our conversation." She had a lot of fun that night. The next time I asked another woman why she didn't go out, she said, "I don't drink." Okay, no problem. We went to a restaurant instead of a bar. The point is, you can try and change an event to make it more inclusive for everyone. Now, there's going to be times where you just don't like the activity people are doing. You need to also be okay with it. And don't be that woman who pulled me aside and made me feel bad about myself for actually being part of the group. Now, I want you to take a minute and just look at this picture. See what it means and see which one aligns most closely with you. So equality is the assumption that everyone benefits from the same supports, that everyone has the same potential with equal treatment. Let's presume you have 2 staff members. One is a single father with 2 children, and one is a single man, no children, but 4 dogs. And you ask them to work the occasional evening from home, and you give them the right tools to be able to do that. That's equality. But what happens is that the single father can't actually work from home in the evenings because he has to run his kids around to all their sports. So the man with the 4 dogs can do this, but the single father can't. Same support, different results.
Now, equity means that everyone gets the support they need. It's about trying to make things fair, right? So a lot of companies do this with affirmative action, saying, we want to hire, everybody we hire, we have to have at least 50% female or minorities or some other magic number, right? In our example of working evenings, perhaps to make it more fair, instead of saying we expect you to work from 7 to 9, we give you more flexible hours to say you can work at home, but you can pick the time. Maybe then the man with the children could work later in the evening or after the kids are in bed.
And justice is when the cause of inequity is addressed and the system barriers are actually removed. So in the case of working evenings, you ask the question, why is this needed in the first place? Is there something else we could do? Getting to that root of the problem is actually really hard to do, but it's something that we should be striving to achieve. So Cordelia Fine asks that you imagine you're going to write a story. And so if I asked you guys right now to write a story on what you think males and females are like, would you say to me, well, Susan, I don't know what you mean. That's almost impossible. And I'm going to read this because it's really long, but every person is a unique, multifaceted, sometimes even contradictory individual with, such different personality traits across contacts, age, gender, education level, sexuality, ethnicity, that it's almost impossible to pigeonhole them into 2 crude stereotypes. Is that what you would say to me? No. You guys would pick up your pen and you'd start writing the story, right?
But we are making progress. We're talking about the problems. Now, Susan and I did an experiment with her daughter, 13, right? We said, write us a fairy tale. You need to have a boy and a girl. That's all we said. So she wrote her fairy tale. She told it to us. We gave her 2 minutes, by the way. And she had a female and a male. They were both tasked with completing something. But they worked together to accomplish that challenge equally. There was no nurturing, sensitive female. There was no dominant, competitive man. Both showed compassion. Both showed ambition. So I'm thinking that maybe the next generation might get it right. So we want to think about what our biases are. They're a conditioning of our childhood. Some we know, we can recognize, some we don't know. Example, food. As a child, maybe you don't eat Brussels sprouts, but you've learned to like them. You've changed that bias. But other biases are there. So you want to, that we don't know. So take a look at them. Think about, how do you treat people in your workplace? Do you lay blame? Do you make them fear you? Or are you open and ask them, share, right? So watch those biases and think about it. Now, I may not be really popular for saying this. I have 2 grandsons. The one's on the outside. They're both fair-haired, fair-skinned. As human beings, it's important to talk about these problems we have with diversity. But as human beings, we have this tendency to swing the pendulum the other way. And I would hate to see my grandsons struggle for who they are. What I would like to see is my grandsons, my granddaughter, your sons and daughters, your grandchildren have equal opportunities to live their lives, to do what they want to do. Now, I also recognize that my grandchildren have privilege today.
Now, I've been told that I act and I think like a man. Do you think that was meant as a compliment? Because I took that as a compliment whenever I've been told that, by the way. But these 2 young men up here are really quite sensitive. And I was thinking about it. If somebody asked them or told them that they thought and acted like a girl, would that be a compliment for them? Probably not. So I'd like to see us get to a place where that is a compliment, or even better, where we don't have to differentiate one's actions based on gender stereotypes at all.
Compassion, empathy, caring, these are not bad words. You can use those as a good manager. It makes you a good team member. These are strengths that we want to encourage. We want to really think about how we present ourselves, how others present each other. And it's important to add these kinds of skills to the ones that you have to do a good job.
So in 50 years, will we wonder how we could have ever thought that this was as close as we could get to equality? Or should we be striving for equity or justice? So we encourage you all to pay attention to your small things in your life and speak up when you see those stereotypes. And being silent is not the same as being part of the solution. So pay attention in this conference. Speak up, say something, and be agents of change.
Thank you.
Next.